The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of Afghanistan's Helmand province. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her medical pack one more time before stepping out of the armored vehicle. At 28 years old, she had served 3 tours overseas, but today felt different. Something heavy hung in the air that made even the experienced soldiers around her move with extra caution. Maria had joined the army right after high school, following in her father's footsteps. He had served in Vietnam and always told her that the military would teach her discipline and purpose. What he hadn't told her was how it would feel to hold someone's life in her hands while bullets flew overhead. She had learned that lesson the hard way during her first deployment in Iraq. The mission briefing had been straightforward. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value target was hiding in a compound about 2 miles from their forward operating base. The plan was simple: move in fast, secure the target, and extract before enemy reinforcements could arrive. Maria's job was to stay with the support team and provide medical assistance if needed. But plans rarely survived contact with the enemy. The convoy consisted of 4 vehicles carrying a mix of Navy SEALs and Army support personnel. Maria rode in the 3rd vehicle with Sergeant Thompson, a communications specialist who had become one of her closest friends during their deployment. Thompson was from Texas and had a way of making everyone laugh even in the worst situations. He kept cracking jokes during the drive, trying to lighten the mood. "Rodriguez, you sure you packed enough bandages in that bag?" Thompson asked with a grin. "Looks like you're planning to wrap up the whole Taliban." Maria smiled back, but her mind was focused on her equipment. She had learned to trust her instincts, and something told her she would need everything she had packed today. Her medical bag contained enough supplies to treat multiple casualties: trauma dressings, tourniquets, morphine injectors, IV fluids, and a dozen other items that could mean the difference between life and death. The terrain grew rougher as they approached the target area. Ancient mud brick walls lined the narrow roads, creating perfect hiding spots for enemy fighters. The vehicles slowed to navigate around potholes and debris. Maria noticed how quiet the local area seemed. No children playing in the streets, no vendors selling goods, no normal signs of life. The silence felt wrong. Lieutenant Commander Jake Phoenix Morrison led the SEAL team from the 1st vehicle. He was a veteran operator with over 100 combat missions under his belt. Morrison had specifically requested Maria for this operation after seeing her work during a previous joint mission. He knew that having a skilled medic could make the difference between bringing everyone home or having to write letters to families. As they reached the dismount point, Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. "All teams, we're going in on foot from here. Stay alert and watch your 6. Intelligence suggests minimal resistance, but we all know how reliable that can be." Maria checked her sidearm and made sure her medical supplies were easily accessible. She had trained extensively in combat medicine, learning to provide care while under fire. The training was intense, but nothing could fully prepare someone for the real thing. The first time she had treated a wounded soldier while enemy fire peppered the ground around them, her hands had shaken so badly she could barely start an IV. Now, after multiple deployments, she moved with the confidence that came from experience. The compound sat at the end of a long, narrow valley. Ancient irrigation ditches and low stone walls provided some cover for the approaching team. The plan called for the SEALs to breach the main building while the support team secured the perimeter. Maria would position herself at a rally point where she could quickly reach any casualties. Everything went wrong in the first 30 seconds. As the lead element moved toward the compound, the valley erupted in gunfire. Enemy fighters had prepared an elaborate ambush, using the terrain to their advantage. Machine gun fire raked the ground from multiple directions, and rocket-propelled grenades began exploding among the scattered vehicles. "Ambush! Take cover!" Morrison's voice cut through the chaos as his team dove behind whatever protection they could find. Maria flattened herself against a low wall as bullets cracked overhead. The carefully planned mission had instantly become a fight for survival. She could hear wounded soldiers calling for help, but the intense enemy fire made it impossible to reach them safely. "Medic! We need a medic up here!" The desperate call came from somewhere ahead, but Maria couldn't see who had been hit through the smoke and dust. She tried to move forward, but Sergeant Thompson grabbed her arm. "Stay down, Rodriguez. You can't help anyone if you get yourself killed." Thompson was right. But every instinct told Maria to run toward the wounded voices. She had taken an oath to provide care to those who needed it. Regardless of the circumstances, watching helplessly while soldiers suffered went against everything she believed in. The firefight intensified as more enemy fighters joined the battle. Maria could see muzzle flashes from windows and rooftops throughout the compound. The ambush had been well planned, with interlocking fields of fire that made movement nearly impossible. The rescue helicopters that should have been standing by were still 20 minutes away. Phoenix is hit. The radio call sent a chill through Maria's body. Morrison was one of the toughest soldiers she had ever known. If he was calling for help, the situation was serious. She spotted movement near a damaged wall about 50 meters ahead. 3 figures were trying to take cover behind scattered rocks and debris. Even from a distance, she could see blood on their uniforms. 2 of them appeared to be dragging a third who wasn't moving. "I see them," Maria told Thompson. "They're trapped in the open. The enemy has them pinned down." Thompson peered over the wall and immediately ducked back down as bullets chipped pieces of stone near his head. "There's no way to reach them without crossing that open ground. It would be suicide." Maria studied the terrain, looking for any route that might provide cover. The irrigation ditch that ran along the left side of the valley might offer some protection, but it would require crawling almost 100 meters under fire. The chances of making it without being hit were slim, but the chances of the wounded SEALs surviving without medical attention were even slimmer. The radio crackled with damage reports from throughout the valley. Multiple vehicles had been hit, and several soldiers were wounded. The enemy fire was so intense that the supporting aircraft couldn't get close enough to provide effective assistance. The entire mission was falling apart. Maria watched as one of the figures behind the distant rocks tried to return fire, but immediately slumped forward. Now, only one SEAL appeared to be conscious, and he was trying to protect 2 wounded teammates while surrounded by enemy fighters closing in from multiple directions. She made her decision. "Thompson, I'm going after them," Maria said, checking her medical supplies one final time. "Rodriguez, no. The LT will have my head if I let you do something that crazy." Not. The LT isn't here, and those men will die without help." Maria's voice was calm but determined. "Cover me as much as you can." Before Thompson could stop her, Maria was moving. She rolled over the wall and into the irrigation ditch, immediately feeling the shock of ice-cold water soaking through her uniform. The ditch was deeper than it had appeared from a distance, providing better cover than she had hoped for. Bullets cracked overhead as enemy fighters tried to track her movement. Some rounds hit the water around her, sending up small geysers that soaked her gear. Maria kept her medical bag above the waterline while crawling forward as fast as possible. The ditch seemed to stretch forever. Every few meters, she had to stop and catch her breath while bullets searched for her. Her knees and elbows were scraped raw from crawling over rocks and debris in the muddy water. The weight of her gear made every movement exhausting. Halfway to her destination, Maria realized that the enemy fighters had figured out her route. Machine gun fire began systematically working along the ditch, getting closer to her position with each burst. She pressed herself against the muddy bank and prayed that the next rounds would miss. A rocket-propelled grenade exploded just meters from the ditch, showering her with dirt and debris. The concussion left her ears ringing and her vision blurry, but she forced herself to keep moving. The wounded SEALs were depending on her. As she approached their position, Maria could hear one of them calling out weakly. The voice was barely audible over the gunfire, but she could tell the soldier was in serious pain. She had to reach them before blood loss or shock claimed their lives. The final 20 meters were the worst. The ditch became shallower, providing less cover just when she needed it most. Enemy fire seemed to be coming from everywhere as fighters repositioned to get better angles on the trapped Americans. Maria took a deep breath and prepared for the most dangerous part of her journey. She would have to leave the ditch and cross open ground to reach the wounded SEALs. Once she made that move, there would be no turning back. Maria burst from the irrigation ditch like a swimmer breaking the surface of a pool. Immediately, she could hear the sharp crack of bullets passing close to her head. The wounded SEALs were just ahead, but the final sprint felt like running through a thunderstorm where the lightning was aimed directly at her. "American medic coming in," she shouted as she dove behind the rocky outcropping where the three men had taken shelter. The scene that greeted her was worse than she had imagined. Lieutenant Commander Morrison lay unconscious with a massive head wound that had soaked his uniform in blood. Petty Officer First Class Marcus "Tank" Williams was trying to apply pressure to a sucking chest wound while also attempting to return fire with his rifle. The third SEAL, Petty Officer Second Class Danny "Ghost" Chen, had taken shrapnel to both legs and was going into shock. "Thank God," Williams gasped when he saw Maria. "I thought we were done for. Phoenix went down about 10 minutes ago. Haven't been able to wake him up." Maria immediately went to work on Morrison. His pulse was weak but steady, and his breathing was shallow. The head wound looked terrible but wasn't immediately life-threatening. The real danger was internal bleeding or brain swelling that she couldn't see. "I need you to keep pressure on your chest wound," she told Williams while examining Morrison's pupils with a small flashlight. "Can you do that for me?" Williams nodded, though Maria could see he was struggling. The chest wound was serious, and the seal around it wasn't holding properly. Pink foam at the corners of his mouth indicated that blood was getting into his lungs. Chen was in the worst immediate danger. His leg wounds were bleeding heavily, and his skin had taken on the pale, clammy appearance that meant his body was shutting down from blood loss. Maria quickly applied tourniquets to both legs, knowing that stopping the bleeding was more important than saving the limbs. "Stay with me, Ghost," she said to Chen while working. "You're going to be fine, but I need you to stay awake." Chen's eyes focused on her with difficulty. "My legs. I can't feel my legs. That's normal right now." Maria lied smoothly while checking his pulse. "The tourniquets are stopping the bleeding, but they also block sensation. You're going to be okay." The enemy fire continued to pour in from multiple directions. Maria could see muzzle flashes from at least 6 different positions around the compound. The Taliban fighters had them completely surrounded and were systematically destroying anything that looked like cover. While treating Chen's wounds, Maria keyed her radio with bloody fingers. "This is Rodriguez with Phoenix Team. I've reached the casualties. We have 3 urgent surgical cases and need immediate evacuation." Thompson's voice crackled back through heavy static. "Rodriguez, the LZ is too hot for choppers. Enemy has heavy weapons positioned all around the valley. Air support is trying to clear a path, but it's going to take time." "How much time?" Maria asked while starting an IV in Chen's arm. "At least 30 minutes, maybe more." Maria looked at her patients and knew they didn't have 30 minutes. Morrison's condition could deteriorate rapidly with a head injury. Williams was losing blood into his chest cavity, and Chen was already showing signs of severe shock despite the tourniquets. She would have to get them out herself. "Tank, I need you to listen carefully," she said to Williams while bandaging Morrison's head wound. "We can't wait for extraction. I'm going to get you guys back to the rally point one at a time." Williams stared at her like she had lost her mind. "Rodriguez, there's 100 meters of open ground between here and the nearest cover. The Taliban will cut you down before you make it 10 feet. "Maybe," Maria admitted while checking her supplies. "But if we stay here, you're all going to die. At least this way, we have a chance." She had already decided to start with Chen. His injuries were the most severe, and moving him first would buy time for the others. The problem was that he couldn't walk or even crawl with the tourniquet on both legs. She would have to carry him the entire distance. Maria grabbed Chen under his arms and started dragging him toward the edge of their cover. "When I start moving, you guys lay down as much covering fire as you can. Try to keep their heads down." "Rodriguez, this is crazy," Williams protested, but he was already shifting his rifle into position. "Crazy is our specialty today," Maria replied, with a grim smile. She took a deep breath and mentally mapped the route back to the irrigation ditch. The first 30 meters would be completely exposed, but after that, she might be able to use some scattered rocks for partial cover. The key was speed and surprise. "Ready?" she asked Williams and Morrison, who had regained consciousness but was clearly disoriented. Both SEALs nodded and prepared to provide covering fire with whatever ammunition they had left. Maria noticed that Williams's hands were shaking from blood loss, but his grip on his rifle remained steady. "Go!" Williams shouted, and both SEALs opened fire on the enemy positions. Maria exploded from cover, dragging Chen behind her like a sled. Immediately, the enemy fire shifted toward them. Bullets kicked up dirt all around as she ran in a zigzag pattern, trying to make herself a harder target while maintaining her grip on Chen. The weight of the wounded SEAL made every step a struggle. Chen was muscular and heavy, and his gear added another 50 pounds. Maria's legs burned with effort as she forced herself to keep moving despite the growing pain in her lungs. A bullet snapped past her ear, so close she could feel the heat. Another round hit Chen's backpack, sending up a small explosion of fabric and gear. Maria could hear him groaning with pain as his wounded legs bounced over the rough ground. Almost there, she gasped, though they were only halfway to safety. The irrigation ditch seemed impossibly far away. Maria's vision started to tunnel from the physical effort and adrenaline overload. Her uniform was soaked with sweat despite the cold morning air. Every muscle in her body screamed for her to stop and rest. Enemy fighters were repositioning to get better angles on her. Machine gun fire began walking toward them, in short, controlled bursts. Maria could see the impacts getting closer with each burst. In seconds, the gunner would have her range. She dove forward just as a long burst of automatic fire ripped through the space where she had been standing. The momentum carried both her and Chen into a shallow depression that provided momentary cover. Maria used the brief respite to catch her breath and check on her patient. Chen's face was gray with shock, but he was still conscious. "Leave me," he whispered. "Save yourself." "Not happening," Maria replied firmly while adjusting his tourniquets. "We're going home together, or not at all." The final sprint to the ditch required crossing 20 meters of completely open ground. There was no cover, no concealment, and no way to avoid the enemy fire that would surely come. Maria knew she would have to rely on speed and the covering fire from Williams and Morrison. She keyed her radio one more time. "Thompson, I'm bringing the first casualty to the ditch. Be ready to help pull him up." "Standing by," Thompson replied. Maria smiled grimly at the concern in her friend's voice. Careful wasn't really an option anymore. She had committed to this course of action, and now she had to see it through, regardless of the consequences. She gathered Chen in her arms again and prepared for the final rush. Her legs felt like rubber, and her hands were cramping from gripping his gear, but she forced herself to focus on the task ahead. 20 meters to safety. 20 meters to give Chen a chance at survival. "Here we go," she whispered, and launched herself toward the irrigation ditch. The world exploded in gunfire as every enemy position opened up on them simultaneously. Bullets cracked overhead like angry hornets, and the ground around them erupted in small geysers of dirt and rock. Maria ran harder than she had ever run in her life, her legs pumping like pistons while she dragged Chen behind her. A round hit her backpack, spinning her halfway around. But she managed to keep her feet and continue forward. Another bullet grazed her helmet, leaving a bright scratch in the camouflage paint. The edge of the ditch was just meters away now. Thompson appeared at the rim of the irrigation channel, reaching out to help. "Come on, Rodriguez. You're almost there." With a final burst of energy, Maria hurled herself forward. Thompson grabbed Chen under his arms, while other soldiers pulled Maria over the edge. They all tumbled into the muddy water in a tangle of arms and legs. "One down, 2 to go," Maria gasped, while Thompson and the other medics took over Chen's care. She had made it once, but now she had to go back for Williams and Morrison. The enemy knew her route now, and they would be ready for her return trip. The element of surprise was gone, and the Taliban fighters would be positioned to cut her down the moment she left the safety of the ditch. But there was no choice. Williams and Morrison were still trapped and running out of time. Maria checked her ammunition, adjusted her gear, and prepared to make the journey again. The hardest part wasn't the physical danger. It was knowing that each trip would be more difficult than the last, and that her luck couldn't hold forever. Somewhere in the compound, enemy fighters were already moving to better positions, preparing for her next attempt. Maria looked back toward the rocky outcropping where 2 SEALs waited for rescue. They were depending on her, just as she had always depended on them during previous missions. That mutual trust was what made elite units work, and she wasn't about to break it now. She started crawling back through the irrigation ditch toward the two remaining casualties, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether she brought everyone home or became a casualty herself. The second trip back through the irrigation ditch felt like swimming through molasses. Maria's muscles had already been pushed beyond their limits during the first rescue, and now every movement sent waves of pain through her exhausted body. The cold water that had seemed refreshing earlier now felt like liquid ice against her overheated skin. Worse than the physical exhaustion was the knowledge that the enemy was now actively hunting her. She could hear voices shouting in Pashto as Taliban fighters repositioned themselves along her route. They had figured out her plan and were setting up a killing field for her next rescue attempt. When Maria reached the position closest to Williams and Morrison, she paused to assess the situation. The two SEALs had managed to find slightly better cover behind a larger rock formation, but their condition had clearly deteriorated. Williams was slumped against the rocks, his breathing labored and shallow. Morrison was conscious, but kept drifting in and out of focus, a dangerous sign with his head injury. "Rodriguez, that you?" Williams called out weakly when he spotted movement in the ditch. "It's me," Maria replied, studying the approach route. The enemy had indeed repositioned. She could see at least 3 new firing positions that hadn't been there during her first trip. "How are you holding up, Tank?" "Been better," Williams admitted. "Phoenix is getting worse. He keeps asking for his wife." Maria's heart sank. When head injury patients started talking about family members who weren't present, it usually meant increased intracranial pressure. Morrison needed surgery, not just first aid, and he needed it soon. She made a tactical decision that went against all her medical training. Instead of taking the most seriously injured patient first, she would evacuate Williams. Morrison was unconscious and wouldn't be able to help during the extraction, but Williams might be able to walk part of the way if she could stabilize his chest wound. "Tank, I'm coming for you first," she called out. "Can you move at all?" "Maybe," Williams replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "Chest hurts like hell, but I think I can walk some." Maria began crawling out of the ditch toward their position. Immediately, rifle fire erupted from the new enemy positions. The Taliban fighters had been waiting for exactly this moment. Bullets whined overhead as she pressed herself against the ground and tried to find any available cover. A machine gun opened up from a position she hadn't seen before, sending a long burst that kicked up dirt just inches from her head. The gunner had her range and was methodically adjusting his fire to zero in on her position. She had perhaps seconds before the next burst found its mark. Rolling desperately to her left, Maria managed to reach a small depression that offered minimal protection. The machine gun fire followed her movement, chewing up the ground where she had been lying moments before. She was pinned down in the open with nowhere to go. "Covering fire," Williams shouted, and both SEALs began shooting at the enemy positions despite their wounds. The distraction gave Maria the chance she needed. She sprinted the final 20 meters to the rocks, diving behind the formation just as concentrated fire erupted from multiple directions. The enemy had been coordinating their response, waiting for her to commit to the rescue before unleashing everything they had. "This is getting worse by the minute," Williams observed as bullets chipped pieces off their protective rocks. Maria immediately went to work on his chest wound, replacing the makeshift seal with proper medical tape and gauze. The wound was worse than she had initially thought. A piece of shrapnel had punched through his lung and was possibly lodged near his heart. Moving him would be extremely dangerous, but leaving him would be fatal. "I'm going to give you something for the pain," she told Williams while preparing a morphine injection. "But not too much. I need you conscious and able to move." Williams gritted his teeth as the needle went in. "How's Ghost doing?" "Thompson's team has him stabilized. He'll make it if we can get him to a hospital." Maria didn't mention that Chen had lost consciousness during the trip back, and that his vital signs were becoming increasingly unstable. She turned her attention to Morrison, whose condition had indeed deteriorated. His pupils were unequal in size, and he was showing signs of increased brain pressure. Even if they managed to get him out of the immediate danger zone, his chances of survival were diminishing with each passing minute. "Phoenix, can you hear me?" Maria asked, while checking his pulse. Morrison's eyes opened but didn't seem to focus on her face. "Sarah? Is that you?" "Sarah?" he mumbled. Apparently speaking to his wife, Maria exchanged worried glances with Williams. Morrison was drifting deeper into unconsciousness, and there was nothing she could do about it in the field. He needed neurosurgery, not battlefield medicine. The radio crackled with an update from Thompson. "Rodriguez, air support is finally getting through. They're working over the enemy positions now, but it's still too hot for a helicopter landing." As if summoned by his words, the sound of jet engines filled the valley. 2 F-16 fighters screamed overhead, their cannon fire raking the enemy positions around the compound. The effect was immediate as Taliban fighters dove for cover and their return fire slackened. "That's our window," Maria told Williams. "Think you can walk if I help support you?" Williams struggled to his feet, wincing with pain but managing to stay upright. "I can make it." "What about Phoenix?" Maria looked at Morrison's unconscious form and made another difficult decision. "I'll have to carry him. Can you cover us during the movement?" "With what ammo I have left," Williams replied, checking his rifle. "Maybe 2 magazines." The air support had temporarily suppressed the enemy fire, but Maria knew it wouldn't last long. As soon as the jets moved to attack other targets, the Taliban fighters would emerge from cover and resume shooting. She had to move both casualties during this brief window of opportunity. Supporting Williams with one arm while dragging Morrison with the other, Maria began the desperate journey back toward the irrigation ditch. Williams gamely tried to walk on his own, but his legs kept buckling from blood loss and pain. Morrison was dead weight, his unconscious body making every step a monumental effort. They had covered perhaps 30 meters when the enemy fire resumed. The jets had moved on to attack other positions, and the Taliban fighters immediately emerged from their hiding places. Automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple directions as the insurgents tried to cut down the fleeing Americans. "Keep moving," Williams gasped, raising his rifle to return fire despite his wounds. A bullet struck the ground between Maria's feet, sending up a spray of dirt and rocks. Another round hit Morrison's equipment, deflecting off his body armor with a metallic clang. The enemy fire was getting closer with each step. Maria's strength was nearly gone. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, and her vision was starting to blur from the physical effort. Williams was becoming heavier as his condition worsened, and Morrison seemed to weigh twice what he should. The irrigation ditch looked impossibly far away. "Almost there," she told herself, though she wasn't sure if she spoke the words aloud. A rocket-propelled grenade exploded behind them, the blast wave knocking all 3 Americans forward into a sprawling heap. Maria's ears were ringing from the concussion, and she could taste blood in her mouth. Williams was motionless beside her, and Morrison showed no signs of consciousness. For a moment, Maria considered the possibility that this was where their story would end. She was exhausted beyond anything she had ever experienced, wounded by shrapnel from the explosion, and facing an enemy that seemed to have unlimited ammunition and perfect positioning. The smart thing to do would be to find cover and wait for rescue. But that wasn't who Maria Rodriguez was. She had joined the army to serve others, trained as a medic to save lives, and deployed to Afghanistan to bring her skills to those who needed them most. These 2 SEALs had risked their lives on countless missions to protect America and its allies. She wasn't about to abandon them now. Struggling back to her feet, Maria grabbed both men and resumed the journey toward safety. Her body moved on autopilot, muscle memory from endless training taking over when conscious thought became impossible. 1 foot in front of the other, 1 meter at a time, getting closer to the irrigation ditch that represented safety. Thompson appeared at the edge of the canal, along with 2 other soldiers who had crawled forward to help. "Come on, Rodriguez! You're almost home." The final sprint became a blur of gunfire, shouting voices, and desperate movement. Maria felt hands grabbing her gear and pulling all 3 of them into the relative safety of the irrigation ditch. She collapsed face first into the muddy water, her strength completely gone. "We got them," Thompson shouted into his radio. "All casualties secured. Requesting immediate evacuation." Maria rolled onto her back and looked up at the Afghan sky. The mission that had started as a routine raid had become a desperate fight for survival, but somehow they had all made it out alive. Williams was unconscious but breathing. Morrison was stable despite his head injury, and Chen was being prepared for evacuation by the other medics. "Rodriguez, you crazy woman," Thompson said with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "I can't believe you pulled that off." Maria managed a weak smile. "Just doing my job." But even as she said the words, she knew it had been much more than that. Sometime during those terrible minutes under fire, the mission had stopped being about following orders or completing objectives. It had become about bringing her friends home, about honoring the trust that soldiers placed in each other, and about living up to the oath she had taken to preserve life. The sound of approaching helicopters filled the valley as the evacuation aircraft finally arrived. Within minutes, all 4 casualties would be on their way to the trauma center at Bagram Airfield, where surgeons would work to repair the damage done by Taliban bullets and shrapnel. As the medical helicopter lifted off, Maria looked down at the compound where the firefight had taken place. Smoke still rose from several buildings, and she could see scattered equipment marking the spots where American soldiers had fought for their lives. It looked peaceful from the air, giving no indication of the violence that had erupted there just an hour earlier. Williams squeezed her hand as the medics worked on his chest wound. "Thank you," he said simply. Morrison was still unconscious, but his vital signs had stabilized during the flight. The neurosurgeons at Bagram would determine the extent of his brain injury, but at least he was alive to receive their care. Chen drifted in and out of consciousness, but the doctors had assured Maria that his legs could be saved despite the massive blood loss. He would walk again, though it would take months of rehabilitation. 3 weeks later, Maria received a letter from Morrison's wife thanking her for bringing her husband home. The surgery had been successful, and while he would need extensive rehabilitation, the doctors expected a full recovery. Williams had also made it through surgery and was already talking about returning to duty. Chen was learning to walk again and joking about his new collection of scars. The mission had officially been classified as a tactical failure. The high-value target had escaped during the firefight, and significant equipment had been lost during the ambush. From a strategic standpoint, nothing had been accomplished. But Maria knew that success couldn't always be measured in terms of objectives achieved or targets eliminated. Sometimes success meant getting your people home safely, regardless of the cost or risk involved. Sometimes it meant refusing to accept that good soldiers had to die in foreign fields, far from their families. The Army awarded her the Silver Star for valor during the action, though she always insisted that she had simply done what any medic would have done in the same situation. The citation mentioned her extraordinary heroism and disregard for personal safety while rescuing wounded comrades under intense enemy fire. What the citation didn't mention was the weight of responsibility she had felt for those men, or the way their survival had given meaning to everything she had trained for as a soldier and a medic. It didn't describe the moment when she decided that their lives were worth risking her own, or the strength she had found when her body wanted to quit. Years later, when people asked Maria about that day in Afghanistan, she would always deflect the praise to the SEALs who had trusted her enough to follow her crazy plan, and to Thompson and the other soldiers who had provided covering fire during the rescue. She insisted that heroism was a team effort, not an individual achievement. But privately, she knew that something had changed in her during those minutes under fire. She had discovered reserves of courage and determination that she hadn't known existed, and she had learned that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when the stakes were high enough. The 3 SEALs she had rescued went on to complete many more successful missions during their careers. Each of them credited Maria with giving them the chance to return home to their families and continue serving their country. They stayed in touch with her throughout their respective careers, forming bonds that went far beyond the normal relationships between soldiers. Maria Rodriguez continued serving as a combat medic for several more years, before eventually transitioning to a civilian career in emergency medicine. She carried the lessons learned in that Afghan valley into every aspect of her life, approaching challenges with the same determination and refusal to give up that had characterized her actions during the rescue. The story of the medic who everyone thought had fallen became a legend within the special operations community, passed down through training courses and informal conversations. It served as a reminder that courage could emerge from unexpected places, and that the bonds between soldiers could overcome seemingly impossible odds. But for Maria, the real victory wasn't the medals or recognition that followed. It was the simple knowledge that 3 good men had gone home to their families, and that she had played a part in making that possible. In a war filled with moral complexity and uncertain outcomes, that represented something pure and unambiguous that she could be proud of for the rest of her life.